They cannot hear, but I feel it. Death is coming. The icy ground beneath Elder Yekaterina's feet trembled, a chilling premonition no one else in the Yakut village perceived. The wind howled at 70 degrees C, but it was the vibration, the deadly resonance in the air that chilled her deaf heart. 7 white shadows, monstrous and hungry, descended from the tundras, their wild eyes piercing the relentless blizzard. With the vital herd cornered and the river ice about to give way under the pressure of their advance, Yekaterina knew her ancestral wisdom was the only weapon. But would it be enough to stop the fury of the icy horde? Yekaterina raised her wrinkled face. Her eyes, once serene, now burned with an urgency that transcended words. She pointed north, towards the indistinct mass of snow and darkness where the threat was materializing. Her arms, thin but firm, gestured with an intensity that sought to convey the panic she felt in the earth. The villagers, accustomed to her quietude, watched her with confusion. The young hunter, Boris, in his early 20s, the most agile and observant, was the first to approach. He saw the desperation in the elder's eyes, a rare emotion for Yekaterina, who had always been a pillar of calm. "What is it, Yekaterina?" he asked, his voice almost swallowed by the howling wind, but the elder, of course, did not hear. She grasped his arm, her icy hands trembling slightly, and pulled him close, pointing north again, then towards the reindeer herd, which was beginning to stir, though still without apparent reason to the others. The reindeer, with their keen instincts, sensed something, a smell perhaps, or a change in air pressure that humans did not perceive. Yekaterina felt the same thing, but amplified, a deep, heavy beat that reverberated through her entire being. She drew in the air with her gloved fingers, the massive shape of a bear, repeating the gesture 7 times, and then pointed to the river, making a cracking motion with her hands. Boris's face paled. 7 bears and the river. He looked at the other villagers, who were now gathering, curious and apprehensive. Yekaterina's message was terrifying, almost unbelievable. Polar bears were rare so close to the village, and 7 of them, so large they seemed like mountains of ice, was unprecedented. The murmur of disbelief began to spread. 7 bears? "Yekaterina must be mistaken," said a woman, covering her mouth with her hand. "The river is solid," another exclaimed, stamping his foot on the ice to prove it. But Boris, who had known the elder's silent wisdom since childhood, felt a chill down his spine. He saw the truth in her eyes, the same truth that had guided the village through countless winters. Yekaterina did not speak, but she felt intensely. And what she felt now was mortal danger. With a decisive nod, Yekaterina pulled Boris closer, and with a stick she found on the ground, began to trace a rudimentary map in the hardened snow. Her lines were quick and precise. The village, the river, the herd, and then a winding route through mountains and canyons that no one had used for generations. She pointed to the frozen lake beyond the canyons, and then to a distant point, a safe refuge. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as if reciting an ancient prayer. Boris watched, his mind trying to decipher the symbols. He recognized the ancient escape route, a legend told by the elders, but never truly traveled. It was dangerous, treacherous, full of crevices and narrow gorges. And the lake. The lake was known for its deep waters and treacherous ice, which cracked with the slightest tremor. Yekaterina pointed to the herd, then to the invisible bears, and finally to the route, with unwavering determination. She was proposing a desperate escape, a plan that defied logic, but which might be their only hope. The elder then looked at Boris, her eyes fixed on his, conveying a clear message. "Trust me." He swallowed hard. The responsibility was immense. He was young, But Yekaterina's faith in him was palpable. He knew that if there was a chance, she would find it. The village depended on it. The wind howled and the ground, to Yekaterina, continued to vibrate with the relentless approach of the icy horde. Time was running out, and Boris's decision to trust the elder would be the first step towards everyone's survival. Boris felt the weight of that gaze. Yekaterina's silent faith that seemed stronger than the icy wind itself. He nodded, a lump in his throat, and turned to the villagers, who watched him with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. How would he explain the inexplicable? How would he make them believe in something they could not see, hear, or feel, except through the deaf elder? The challenge was monumental, but the determination in Yekaterina's eyes gave him no other choice. Yekaterina says there are 7 polar bears coming, giants, and the river ice won't hold, Boris announced, his voice trying to sound firm, but betraying a tremor. A heavy silence fell over the group, soon broken by nervous laughter and exclamations of disbelief. 7 bears? Boris, are you sick from the cold? A corpulent man, Nikolai, scoffed, crossing his arms. And the river? I just crossed it with my sled. It's firmer than rock. Yekaterina, oblivious to the words, but attentive to facial expressions and body language, perceived the disbelief. Her lips tightened. She took Boris's hand again, her rough palm conveying a silent urgency. She pointed to the improvised map in the snow, tracing the route through the canyons and Whispering Lake. Her eyes, which had seen so many winters, pleaded for understanding. Boris took a deep breath. She has a plan. An ancient route through the canyons and over Whispering Lake. It's dangerous, but she says it's the only way to save the herd and us. He knew Whispering Lake was feared. Its deep waters and underwater currents created unstable ice, prone to treacherous cracks. The idea of crossing it with an entire herd was insane for anyone but Yekaterina. As he spoke, a low, guttural sound, almost a moan, echoed from the reindeer herd. They were now visibly agitated, heads raised, sniffing the air nervously. Their hooves pawed the ground, and some began to move in tight circles. The animals' restlessness was a sign the villagers could not ignore. Nikolai's laughter died in his throat. The reindeer. They feel something, murmured a young woman, Lena, who cared for the calves. Her eyes widened. I've never seen them like this, except when wolves are near. But wolves were different. Polar bears, especially 7 of them, were a force of nature that even the most experienced hunters would not willingly face. Yekaterina, sensing the change in atmosphere, the hesitation replacing disbelief, nodded to Boris, encouraging him to continue. She pointed to the agitated herd, then towards the invisible bears, and made a broad gesture with her hands, indicating the need for swift movement. The village needed to act, and act now. Boris felt a chill down his spine, not just from the cold, but from the certainty radiating from the elder. He remembered his grandmother's stories, telling how Yekaterina, even without hearing, had always known when a storm was approaching. When the ice was safe for fishing, or where game would be plentiful, her connection to the earth was mystical, almost palpable. We need to trust her, Boris said, his voice gaining strength. She has never misled us. The reindeer are telling us the same. The danger is real. Some villagers exchanged apprehensive glances. Yekaterina's wisdom was legendary. Even if her communication was an enigma to many, the reindeer's agitation was irrefutable testimony that something was wrong. Fear began to seep in, replacing disbelief. The wind brought not only the biting cold, but also a premonition, a sense that the icy horde was indeed approaching, and time for the final decision was dangerously running out. Faith in Yekaterina, once a whisper, began to solidify into an urgent need for survival. Faith in Yekaterina, once a whisper, began to solidify into an urgent need for survival. Fear, like the cold, was contagious, but the elders' wisdom offered a path, however risky. The villagers, once skeptical, now looked at the restless reindeer herd with a new understanding. Their instincts were the voice of nature, and nature rarely erred. Nikolai, the corpulent man who had scoffed, was the first to turn his gaze from the herd to Yekaterina. His expression, once scornful, now carried a shadow of apprehension. He scratched his thick beard, a gesture of uncertainty. "If Yekaterina says so," he began, his voice lower, "then perhaps we should listen." The phrase, spoken reluctantly, opened the door to acceptance. Others began to murmur, no longer in disbelief, but in concern. Yekaterina, sensing the shift, the hesitation transforming into a grim recognition of danger, moved with surprising agility for her age. She took Boris's hand again, squeezing it tightly, and with her other hand made a quick, broad gesture indicating that time was scarce. Her eyes, deep and full of silent urgency, swept over the villagers' faces, pleading for action. She pointed to the tents, then to the sleds, and then to the herd, indicating that everything needed to be prepared for immediate departure. Boris, with courage renewed by the elders' trust, raised his voice above the howling wind. "We need to prepare, gather the essentials, warm the sleds, and round up the herd. Yekaterina says there's no time to lose." He began to give instructions, his voice firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. Lena, the young woman who cared for the calves, ran to help calm the most agitated reindeer, while others began to move, slowly at first, then with more purpose. The village, once a place of routine and calm, transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Women hurried to gather blankets, dried food, and essential tools. Men pulled the sleds, checking the fastenings and the sturdiness of the wood. Children, sensing the adults' tension, clung to their mothers' skirts, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Yekaterina observed everything, her eyes scrutinizing every movement, feeling the vibrations of the earth growing ever more intense, a heavy, menacing rhythm that only she perceived. She approached Nikolai, who still seemed reluctant, and touched his arm. Her eyes met his, and she made a gesture of 7 with her fingers, then a movement of large and strong, and then pointed to the river, making a cracking sign with her hands. Nikolai swallowed hard, the image of the 7 giant bears and the treacherous ice solidifying in his mind. He nodded, disbelief finally yielding to fear. "All right, Yekaterina," he murmured. "I trust you." He turned and began to organize the older men, his voice deep and authoritative, spurring them to action. The wind increased in intensity, bringing with it denser snowflakes and a sense of oppression. Yekaterina felt the vibrations intensify, a deep tremor that seemed to come from within the earth itself. The bears were closer. There was no more time for doubts or hesitation. Everyone's survival depended on speed and unwavering faith. Yekaterina's unwavering faith, now shared by many, propelled the village into a race against time. The icy air cut the skin, but the warmth of determination began to heat their hearts. Boris, his voice choked with emotion, but firm in his resolve, coordinated the efforts. "Quickly! The elders and children on the sleds. The reindeer need to be guided calmly but without delay." He pointed, gestured, his young and energetic figure contrasting with Yekaterina's concentrated quietude. The elder was at the center of the commotion, her eyes sweeping the village, catching every movement, every expression. She felt the earth beneath her feet vibrate with increasing intensity, a rhythm that grew heavier, more urgent. It was as if the very heart of the tundra was beating an alarm drum, and only she could hear its somber melody. Her lips moved silently, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in an intimate conversation with the ancestral spirits who, she believed, guided her steps. Lena, with the reindeer calves nestling near her legs, worked tirelessly to calm the animals. She whispered words of comfort, her gentle hands stroking their soft fur, while their hooves pawed at the ice, creating a muffled sound of apprehension. "Come on, my little ones. We need to go," she murmured, her own eyes tearful with fear, but her voice firm. The connection between her and the animals was visible, a bond of trust that would be vital for the journey ahead. Nikolai, who had once doubted, was now a driving force. He helped load the sleds with essential supplies, his brute strength allied with a new urgency. "Leave nothing behind that can help us. Every blanket, every piece of dried meat is one more chance to survive," he shouted, his voice hoarse, but full of a conviction that inspired others. He looked at Yekaterina from time to time, a silent respect in his gaze, an acceptance that wisdom unheard is, at times, the deepest. The women, with agility and organization, packed their most precious belongings, furs for warmth, tools for survival, the few family jewels passed down through generations. Their faces were marked by worry, but also by an innate resilience, the same that had kept them steadfast through countless winters. They knew that life in Yakutia was a constant struggle, and that unity was the only way to prevail. Yekaterina closed her eyes for an instant, concentrating on the vibrations. The tremor was stronger, closer. She opened her eyes abruptly, and with a quick gesture pointed to Boris, then towards the canyons. Her eyes conveyed a clear message. Time was running out. Departure was now. Boris understood. He gave the signal, and the first sled, pulled by a pair of strong reindeer, began to move, gliding over the snow. The procession began, slow and hesitant at first, but gaining pace as the urgency became palpable. The reindeer herd, guided by Lena and other young people, followed closely, their bodies forming a compact mass against the cold. Yekaterina, with a last look at the village she might never see again, felt a pang of sadness, but also a wave of hope. She was the last to leave, her feet feeling every vibration of the ground, every beat of the earth's heart. The danger was imminent, but faith in her people and her own intuition was the flame that guided her. The icy horde was coming, but they would not be caught unprepared. The long journey through the treacherous canyons and over the frozen lake, a legend now becoming reality, began under the pale light of a sun that barely managed to pierce the relentless blizzard. The procession dragged on, a dark and vulnerable line against the white vastness of the tundra. The wind, now a constant lament, whipped at exposed faces, making breathing difficult. Yekaterina, walking at the front, her steps firm and decisive, was the silent compass. Her eyes, squinted against the snow, scanned the landscape, but it was the earth beneath her fur boots that spoke to her, guiding her through crevices and rocks that marked the entrance to the canyons. The bear's vibrations, though still distant, were a constant pulse, a chilling reminder of the threat. Boris, right behind her, felt the weight of responsibility upon him. He watched Yekaterina, amazed by the certainty of her movements. She pointed with her head, gestured with her gloved hands, and he translated her signals to the others, who followed with exhaustion and faith. "Watch out for the crevice on the right," he shouted, his voice almost inaudible as Yekaterina indicated an invisible danger. The reindeer, guided by Lena, seemed to understand the urgency, their strong hooves finding purchase, but fear made them whinny, muffled by the blizzard. The canyons narrowed, walls of rock and ice looming, creating gloom. The air there was heavier, the cold intense, and the wind's echo created illusions that frightened the villagers. Yekaterina, however, seemed unperturbed. She stopped suddenly, raising a hand to Boris. Her eyes were fixed on a point ahead, and she made a slow, circular motion with her finger, indicating slowly and carefully. Boris approached, and she touched the ground with her foot, gesturing crevice. He looked ahead but saw only snow. Trusting her, he signaled for the procession to stop. Cautiously, Yekaterina bent down, and with the tip of her staff removed snow, revealing an almost invisible crack in the ice covering the path. It was a treacherous trap, capable of swallowing a sled or reindeer. A chill ran down Boris's spine. Without Yekaterina, they would have fallen. Nikolai, who was behind, saw the crack and his face contorted in relief and fear. He knelt, examining the treacherous opening. "By all the ancestors," he murmured, his voice choked. Disbelief dissipated, replaced by deep respect for the elder. He helped Boris guide the sleds and reindeer through a narrow and dangerous detour, each step a challenge. The journey through the canyons was a test of endurance and faith. Tiredness and cold weighed heavily, muscles ached. The children, wrapped in furs on the sleds, whimpered softly, and their mothers soothed them with whispered songs, maintaining hope. Yekaterina, however, showed no signs of fatigue. She was the embodiment of resilience, her intuition the only light in that labyrinth. She felt the bear's vibrations grow stronger, closer, a silent roar in her chest. Time was running out. With an urgent nod, she indicated to Boris that they should speed up. They were approaching the exit of the canyons, and Whispering Lake, with its dangers, awaited them. A mirror of ice under the blizzard, about to reveal its secret. The next stage would be riskier, but faith in Yekaterina was everyone's anchor. The exit of the canyons revealed an even more desolate landscape. Whispering Lake stretched ahead, a vast surface of grey, opaque ice, covered by a thin layer of fresh snow. The lake's name came from the strange sounds the ice produced as it expanded and contracted, groans and cracks that, in the villagers' minds, were the voices of spirits trapped in its depths. Yekaterina stopped at the edge, her eyes fixed on the icy horizon. She felt the lake in a way no one else could. The vibrations beneath her feet were a complex song of instability and danger, a constant warning. She raised her hand, gesturing to Boris that the path ahead required utmost caution. Boris, with a heavy heart, relayed the message. "Yekaterina says to go slowly. The lake ice is treacherous." The villagers exchanged glances, fear deepening. The idea of crossing Whispering Lake was already terrifying, but with the threat of the bears approaching, it seemed a desperate gamble. Lena, with the younger reindeer, tried to keep the animals calm, stroking their icy muzzles. They also felt the tension, their large, dark eyes reflecting the vastness of the ice. Yekaterina took the first step, her small, determined figure leading the way. She didn't walk. She felt the ice, her feet like sensors, interpreting every tremor, every change in the surface texture. She gestured right, left, indicating the safest points, the areas where the ice was thicker, more reliable. Boris followed her closely, translating her movements to the others. The procession advanced slowly, a tense silence hanging in the air, broken only by the howling wind and the distant cracks of the ice. The bear's vibrations grew sharper for Yekaterina, a heavy, constant rhythm that pulsed in her chest. She knew they were approaching rapidly. The natural trap she had planned depended on precise timing, on luring the predators to a specific point where the ice would break under their weight. But the lake was unpredictable, and time was running out. Suddenly, a different sound, sharper and more penetrating, cut through the icy air. It wasn't the wind, nor the usual groans of the lake. It was a sharp, dry crack that reverberated across the entire surface. The villagers stopped, their hearts pounding in their chests. The ice beneath their feet trembled violently, and a thin crack, like lightning, began to spread rapidly ahead of them, dividing the path Yekaterina had indicated. Panic threatened to take over. "The ice is cracking!" someone shouted, their voice choked. The reindeer stirred, some rearing up, others backing away in terror. Yekaterina, feeling the drastic change in vibrations, the increasing instability, raised her hands with urgency. Her eyes widened. She pointed to the opening crack, then to the right, to an area she had previously avoided, and made a quick run gesture. Boris understood the gravity of the situation. The original route was compromised. Yekaterina was guiding them to a riskier part of the lake, but it was the only option. "Quickly, to the right, follow Yekaterina," he shouted, his voice trying to drown out the growing fear. As the villagers tried to change direction, a deep, grave roar echoed, not from the ice, but from the darkness behind them. A massive white shape emerged from the blizzard, the first of the polar bears, frighteningly close, its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. The turning point had arrived, and the race for survival had just become a desperate chase over the breaking ice, with every step. The sight of the bear was a brutal shock. A sharp cry from Lena tore through the air, muffled by the wind but audible in the collective panic. The reindeer, already agitated, plunged into despair, rearing and kicking, threatening to overturn the sleds and scatter the herd. Fear, once a distant shadow, was now a roaring beast within every heart, a palpable terror that clutched at their throats. Boris felt his blood run cold. The sight of the white giant advancing with terrifying yet relentless slowness, its yellow eyes fixed on the herd, etched in his mind. Yekaterina, despite not hearing the deafening roar, felt the intense vibration of the ground, a deep tremor that announced the overwhelming proximity of the predator. Her eyes, previously fixed on the treacherous crack, now swept over the group, perceiving the terror etched on every face. She could not afford to panic. With surprising strength for her age, she grabbed Boris's arm, her fingers digging into his skin through the heavy fur clothing. She pointed urgently to the right, to the riskier route she had chosen, and made a frantic "Run, run" gesture with her hands. "Quickly, follow Yekaterina. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything," Boris yelled, his voice hoarse with effort, trying to overcome the maddening noise of the reindeer and the biting howl of the wind. He pushed the first sled, where the children and elders were, urging the pullers to move at maximum speed. The ice beneath their feet cracked more frequently, each sound a vivid reminder of the fragility of their path over the treacherous lake. Lena struggled desperately to control the reindeer calves, who thrashed about blind with fear. One of them, small and fragile, almost slipped into a newly opened crevice, threatening to fall into the icy waters. With a quick, instinctive reflex, Lena pulled it back, hugging it tightly against her chest, while trying to guide the herd in the new direction indicated by Yekaterina. "Come on, my loves, don't stop, please," she whispered, her tears freezing on her cold, reddened cheeks. Nikolai, with his brute strength and newfound conviction, became a pillar of resistance. He helped push the heavier sleds, protecting the women and children on them, his imposing presence a relief amidst the chaos. His eyes, once skeptical and full of disbelief, now reflected an unwavering faith in Yekaterina. He looked at the elder, who guided with an almost supernatural determination, and felt a wave of deep respect and gratitude. "Stay together. Don't lose the line. Don't separate," he shouted, his deep voice echoing in the void. The polar bear roared again, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the ice itself, echoing not only in their ears, but in the villagers' souls. Two more imposing white shapes emerged from the blizzard, following the first with alarming speed, their movements swift and coordinated. The icy horde was in full attack, a terrifying sight that froze the blood in their veins. The ice beneath the villagers' feet groaned and cracked with frightening frequency, fissures spreading like spiderwebs across the entire surface. One of them, wide and deep, opened right behind the last sled, swallowing a piece of the surface and making the dark, icy water bubble in a treacherous whirlpool. The salty, penetrating smell of the sea, coming from the depths of the lake, mingled with the air, a grim premonition of imminent danger. Yekaterina did not look back. Her eyes were fixed ahead, scrutinizing the blizzard, her feet like extensions of her soul, feeling every vibration of the ice, every underwater current that shaped the fragility of the surface. She knew she was guiding them to the most dangerous part of the lake, where the ice was thinnest and the natural trap she had foreseen could work. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble against the brute force of nature, but their only chance of salvation. She made a gesture of large and deep with her hands, indicating to Boris that the area ahead was the most unstable, but also the most promising for her audacious plan. The intense cold, which seemed to gnaw at their bones, and the paralyzing fear exhausted the villagers' strength. Fatigue weighed on every muscle, but the sight of the giant bears behind them and Yekaterina's silent, unwavering determination spurred them to continue, to fight for every meter. Every step was a victory won with sweat and courage. Every breath an act of pure resilience. The children on the sleds, previously whimpering, were now in sepulchral silence, their small faces pale and eyes wide, watching the terror unfold around them. Their mothers hugged them tightly, silently praying to the ancestors, begging for protection. Yekaterina quickened her pace, her gestures becoming more urgent and emphatic. She pointed to a specific spot on the icy horizon where the blizzard seemed to intensify, creating an almost impenetrable white curtain. It was there, the place where the village's fate would be decided. The ice beneath her feet vibrated with alarming intensity, an ancestral war drum that only she could perceive. Faith in Yekaterina was no longer a choice, but the only hope they had left. They were on the brink of the abyss, but the deaf elder, with her ancestral wisdom and deep connection to the earth, was the fragile yet resilient bridge to safety. The desperate race continued, every heartbeat echoing the frantic and menacing rhythm of the ice breaking beneath their feet. The desperate race continued, every heartbeat echoing the frantic and menacing rhythm of the ice breaking beneath their feet, leading them to the point of no return. Yekaterina, with her unwavering determination, did not slow her pace, her eyes fixed on the distant point where the blizzard seemed to swallow the horizon. She felt the ice beneath her boots as an extension of her own body, every vibration, every tremor, a silent word that only she could interpret. The biting air whipped at her white hair escaping her hood, but she seemed immune to the cold, her mind entirely focused on the survival of her people. Boris, panting and with aching muscles, struggled to keep pace right behind her. He looked at the elder, her figure small and frail, yet emanating colossal strength. Faith in Yekaterina was the only thing that prevented him from succumbing to the panic that threatened to engulf them all. He translated the elder's urgent gestures to the others, his voice hoarse from shouting against the wind. "Faster! Yekaterina says we're almost there! Don't stop!" The reindeer, guided by Lena, were at the limit of exhaustion. Their hooves, once firm, now slipped on the treacherous ice, and their large, dark eyes reflected the primal fear that drove them. Lena, with the calves nestled in a sled, felt her heart clench with every crack of the ice. She whispered words of encouragement to the animals, her gentle hands stroking their necks, trying to convey a calm she herself did not possess. The connection between her and the reindeer was the only thing that kept them together, a fragile web of trust amidst the chaos. Nikolai, with his brute strength, pushed the heavier sleds, protecting the women and children on them. He saw the terror in the little one's eyes, and that sight renewed his own determination. He refused to let fear win. Looking back, he saw two more white shapes emerge from the blizzard, joining the first three. 5 bears now, an icy, relentless horde approaching with terrifying speed. The guttural roar of one of them, though muffled by the wind, seemed to vibrate in the ice itself, raising the hairs on his neck. The ice beneath their feet groaned and cracked with alarming frequency. Cracks spread like spiderwebs across the entire surface, some opening into deep fissures that revealed the dark, icy water below. The salty, penetrating smell of the sea coming from the depths of the lake mingled with the air, a grim premonition of imminent danger. Yekaterina made a gesture of large and deep with her hands, indicating to Boris that the area ahead was the most unstable. but also the most promising for her audacious plan. They were entering the heart of the trap, the intense cold, which seemed to gnaw at their bones, and the paralyzing fear exhausted the villagers' strength. Fatigue weighed on every muscle, but the sight of the giant bears behind them and Yekaterina's silent, unwavering determination spurred them to continue, to fight for every meter. Every step was a victory won with sweat and courage, every breath an act of pure resilience. The children on the sleds, previously whimpering, were now in sepulchral silence, their small faces pale and eyes wide, watching the terror unfold around them. Their mothers hugged them tightly, silently praying to the ancestors, begging for protection. Yekaterina quickened her pace, her gestures becoming more urgent and emphatic. She pointed to a specific spot on the icy horizon where the blizzard seemed to intensify, creating an almost impenetrable white curtain. It was there, the place where the village's fate would be decided. The ice beneath her feet vibrated with alarming intensity, an ancestral war drum that only she could perceive. Another bear emerged from the blizzard, the sixth, and Yekaterina felt the vibration of a seventh, still more distant but inevitable. The trap was about to be activated. Faith in Yekaterina was no longer a choice, but the only hope they had left. They were on the brink of the abyss, but the deaf elder, with her ancestral wisdom and deep connection to the earth, was the fragile yet resilient bridge to safety. The desperate race continued, every heartbeat echoing the frantic and menacing rhythm of the ice, breaking beneath their feet, leading them to the point of no return. The desperate race continued, every heartbeat echoing the frantic and menacing rhythm of the ice, breaking beneath their feet, leading them to the point of no return. Yekaterina, her face marked by wind and age, but her eyes burning with unwavering determination, finally stopped. She raised both hands, making a broad and decisive gesture that Boris understood immediately. "Stop! Now!" Her small figure, framed by the intensifying blizzard at that point, seemed like a statue of courage. Boris, his voice choked with exhaustion and panic, bellowed the order to the group. The sleds groaned. The reindeer whinnied, and the villagers, their hearts in their throats, stopped abruptly, their eyes fixed on the elder. The tense silence was broken only by the howling wind and the sinister cracks of the ice groaning beneath their feet. At that instant, as if nature itself had waited for Yekaterina's signal, the seventh polar bear emerged from the white curtain of the blizzard, a colossus of white fur and icy eyes, joining the other six who were already dangerously close. The sight of the complete pack, 7 giant and relentless predators, sent a chill down everyone's spine. The guttural roar of the leader, now closer, reverberated not only in the air but in the ice itself, intensifying the vibration Yekaterina felt. The elder turned to Boris, her eyes conveying an urgency that needed no words. She pointed to the ice ahead, made a quick motion with her hand, indicating, "Pass through here," and then, with an open palm, gestured, "Quickly, quickly, quickly." It was their last chance. They needed to cross the thinnest, most unstable stretch before the bears arrived. "Everyone, now, follow Yekaterina, don't look back. It's our only chance." Boris shouted, his voice almost a lament as he pushed the first sled with all his might. The reindeer, driven by fear and the guide's urgency, ran across the ice, their hooves sliding and finding purchase in a desperate dance. Lena, with the reindeer calves clutched in the sled, felt the ice crack beneath them with every step, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the world. She closed her eyes for a second, asking for protection from the ancestors before opening them again, focused on keeping the herd together. Nikolai, with a strength that seemed to spring from desperation, helped push the heavier sleds, protecting the women and children. He saw the terror in the little one's eyes, but also the spark of hope that Yekaterina ignited. "Forward! Don't stop!" he bellowed, his voice hoarse with effort as the ice groaned and bent under the weight of the procession. The polar bears, drawn by the movement and the scent of the reindeer, quickened their pace, their massive white bodies merging with the blizzard. They were mere meters away, their roars echoing nature's fury. It was then that it happened. A thunderous sound, louder than any roar, deeper than any crack, tore through the air. The ice behind them where the villagers had just passed, and precisely where the bears were about to step, gave way with terrifying violence. A gigantic fissure, like a hungry mouth, opened up, swallowing vast sheets of ice, and revealing the dark, icy water of the lake, which bubbled and steamed. The bears, caught by surprise, recoiled with furious snarls, their front paws slipping dangerously on the edge of the new fissure. Yekaterina's natural trap had worked. An impassable barrier of water and broken ice now separated them from the predators. The villagers, who were already on the safer stretch of ice, turned back, their faces pale with shock and relief. Frozen tears streamed down some cheeks. The immediate danger had been contained, but the cost of the crossing and the fragility of their existence in that icy world were evident. Yekaterina, standing, her eyes fixed on the opening fissure, felt the earth's tremor subside, replaced by a momentary silence of victory and exhaustion. They had crossed the point of no return, and the village's fate, for now, was safe. The collective sigh of relief that followed the thunderous crack of the ice was almost as deafening as the collapse itself. The villagers, halted and breathless, turned back, their eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. The gigantic fissure, which now separated the group from the hungry bears, was a wall of dark water and broken ice blocks, impassable. The 7 white predators, snarling and huffing, skated dangerously on the edge of the newly formed abyss, their yellow eyes still gleaming with impotent fury. The sight was terrifying, but now, somehow distant. Yekaterina, breathing heavily, felt the ice beneath her feet stabilize. The frantic vibration of the bears had subsided, replaced by a relative silence, broken only by the howling wind and the bubbling of the water. She could not hear the cries of relief, but she felt the wave of emotion that swept through the group, a potent mix of newly overcome terror and fragile hope. She turned slowly to Boris, her eyes tearful but firm. With a slow, exhausted gesture, she indicated stop, and then, with an open palm, made a circular motion over her chest, conveying calm and rest. Boris, his body trembling with adrenaline and cold, could barely speak. "Stop! Rest!" "For a bit. Yekaterina says for us to calm down." He could hardly believe what had happened. The elder, deaf and frail, had truly saved them all. Respect and admiration for her reached a new level, almost reverence. He approached her, taking her cold hands and squeezing them with gratitude. Yekaterina smiled, a small, tired smile, but full of a deep peace. Lena, with the reindeer calves still trembling in her arms, collapsed to her knees on the ice, tears of relief streaming freely down her face. She hugged the small animals with a protective strength, murmuring prayers of thanks. The reindeer, though exhausted, seemed to sense the change in the air, their bodies relaxing slightly, though still alert. The herd was safe, for now. Nikolai, who had pushed the last sled with all his might, sank to a sitting position, his ragged breath forming dense clouds in the icy air. He looked at the fissure, then at Yekaterina, and a lump formed in his throat. The doubt he had carried in his heart had completely dissolved. The elder's wisdom was real, palpable. He felt ashamed of his initial disbelief, but now a new faith, stronger and unwavering, filled his being. The relief was immense, but the reality of the situation soon set in. They were still in the middle of Whispering Lake, surrounded by unstable ice and the fury of the Yakut winter. The blizzard continued to fall, and the cold seemed to penetrate every layer of clothing, freezing the hope that had just been born. Yekaterina, after a brief moment of rest, rose again. Her eyes swept the horizon, and she made a new gesture, pointing in a different direction further east, and then a movement of slowly and walk. Boris understood they could not stay there. The ice ahead, though more stable than the section that had just given way, was still dangerous. The trap had worked, but the path to complete safety was still long and arduous. "Let's go. Slowly now. Yekaterina says we need to continue, but with caution," he shouted, his voice renewed by purpose. The villagers, though exhausted, began to move again, each step a conscious effort. The victory against the bears had given them new breath, proof that, with Yekaterina, they could overcome the impossible. The journey was not over, but faith in their silent guardian was the light that guided them through the icy darkness, a beacon of resilience amidst the relentless vastness of Yakutia. The human connection, forged in the heat of adversity, was the true strength that propelled them forward, one step at a time, towards the promise of a new dawn. The promise of a new dawn, however, still hid behind the dense curtain of the blizzard. Every step on the unstable ice of Whispering Lake was a battle against exhaustion and fear that, though diminished, still persisted like a penetrating cold. Yekaterina, with her small figure at the front, seemed to absorb the fury of winter, her eyes fixed on an invisible point on the eastern horizon. She felt the fragility of the ice beneath her boots, the cold current whispering in the depths, but her intuition guided her with a certainty that others could only follow by faith. Boris, with aching muscles and a scratchy throat, stayed right behind, translating the elder's gestures. Slowly. "Keep your distance. The ice is still treacherous," he shouted, his voice almost lost in the howling wind. He saw the unwavering determination on Yekaterina's face, a strength that seemed to defy age and deafness itself. With every movement she made, every signal, hope rekindled, a small warmth amidst the icy desolation. Lena, with the reindeer calves nestled in the sled, felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The adult reindeer, exhausted, dragged themselves, their hooves slipping. She encouraged them with gentle touches and murmured words, her eyes tearful with fatigue, but firm. The connection with the herd was a sacred bond, and she refused to break it. The fear of the bears had diminished, but the threat of the cold and unknown terrain was a new shadow. Nikolai, now a pillar of silent strength, pushed the last sled, where the children and the most fragile huddled. He observed the small, pale faces, the frozen tears on their cheeks, and felt a renewed urgency. Faith in Yekaterina had become an anchor in his heart, and he promised himself he would not fail. His eyes swept the white landscape, searching for any sign of danger. But the blizzard swallowed everything, transforming the world into a hostile white void. Hours dragged on, each longer and colder than the last. The sun, a distant memory, did not appear. The sky was a furious grey smudge. Yekaterina, without slowing her pace, began to make more complex gestures, indicating a change in terrain. She pointed ahead, to a subtle elevation that only her keen senses could discern through the snow. "Canyons! We're reaching the canyons!" Boris bellowed, his voice hoarse with relief and apprehension. The landscape began to change. The lake ice gave way to a deeper, uneven snow crust, dotted with dark rocks that emerged like the teeth of a sleeping monster. The wind, once free, now whipped and howled between the rock formations, creating snow whirls that blinded eyes and cut skin. The ancient route Yekaterina had chosen proved even more treacherous than expected. They found themselves in a labyrinth of ice and rock walls, narrow and slippery. The scarce daylight barely penetrated, and shadows danced menacingly. Yekaterina stopped abruptly, raising her hand. She made a gesture of narrow and dangerous to Boris, pointing to a passage ahead that seemed almost impassable, a dark fissure between two gigantic rock walls. The ice beneath their feet there was a thin layer over an abyss. It's the only passage. Yekaterina says we have to be quick and silent, Boris relayed, his heart pounding in his chest. The reindeer herd instinctively huddled, sensing the imminent danger. Lena, with a lump in her throat, tried to calm them, but the fear was palpable. Nikolai, with a determined look, went ahead, testing the ice with his staff, clearing the way for the sleds. The passage was so narrow that the sleds barely fit. The rock and ice walls were sharp, threatening to tear furs and injure the reindeer. Yekaterina, with surprising agility, guided them through the fissure, feeling every vibration, every echo of the wind that indicated the fragility of the path. Her eyes, previously fixed on the horizon, now scrutinized every inch of the ground, searching for the safest route. Suddenly, a loud crack, sharper and closer than any other, echoed. A deep crack opened right beneath Nikolai's sled, which swayed dangerously. A cry of horror escaped one of the mothers. The icy abyss revealed itself, dark and hungry. Yekaterina, without hesitation, made a frantic gesture to Nikolai. "Back! Now!" Her eyes, full of desperate urgency, met his. It was a trap, a false stretch that her senses had detected too late. Nikolai, with renewed courage, pulled the sled back with superhuman strength, the crack expanding dangerously. Yekaterina pointed to a small ledge on the rock wall to the left, almost invisible in the blizzard. It was the only alternative, an even more precarious path, but their only hope. "This way! Quickly!" Boris yelled, panic resurfacing. The entire village, hanging by a thread, blindly trusted the elder. The climax of the journey had arrived, and faith in Yekaterina was the only thing that kept them from falling into the icy abyss. Faith in Yekaterina was the only thing that kept them from falling into the icy abyss. With surprising agility for her age, Yekaterina moved first, her feet finding purchase where there seemed to be none. She clung to the icy rock, her gloved fingers fumbling for imperfections, and began to climb the small ledge, more an act of faith than logic. Boris, his heart pounding erratically, translated her urgent gestures. One by one, slowly, follow Yekaterina's steps. The wind howled, trying to knock them down, and the snow whipped at their faces. But the sight of the elder, small and determined, was a beacon of hope. Nikolai, the strongest, went second. He tied an improvised rope made of furs to the children's sled, and with a Herculean effort began to pull it along the ledge, while Yekaterina indicated the safest points for him to step. Every movement was calculated, every breath an act of courage. The children, in sepulchral silence, watched the abyss below, their eyes wide, but without crying. Nikolai's firm and protective presence calmed them. Lena, with the reindeer calves in her arms, faced the passage with a mixture of terror and devotion. The adult reindeer, guided by other villagers, were led with extreme caution, one by one, their hooves slipping, but miraculously finding their balance. Yekaterina, at the top of the ledge, extended her hand to each one who passed, a gesture of welcome and silent strength. She felt the vibration of the rock, the instability of the ice, and guided each step with precision. Time seemed to stretch and shrink, measured not by minutes, but by heartbeats. When the last villager and the last reindeer finally reached the other side, a collective sigh of relief escaped, muffled by the wind. They were on firmer ground, though still within the labyrinth of canyons. The narrow and treacherous ledge had been overcome. The imminent danger of the icy abyss was behind them. Yekaterina, exhausted, sat in the snow, her eyes closed for an instant. The tension that had propelled her for so many hours finally began to subside. Boris knelt beside her, his voice choked. "Yekaterina, you saved us again." He didn't need an audible answer. The elder's tired smile, full of a hard-won peace, was enough. Lena, with the reindeer calves safe and sound, approached, her eyes full of tears of gratitude. She hugged the elder, a tight embrace that conveyed all the love and respect she felt. Nikolai, his brow furrowed with concern, but his heart light with relief, watched the scene. Faith in Yekaterina was no longer a matter of belief, but an unquestionable truth, forged in the furnace of danger. The elder, with her ancestral wisdom and deep connection to the earth, had proven to be the true strength of the village. They were still far from complete safety, but the most treacherous obstacle of the canyons had been overcome. The blizzard, though relentless, seemed less threatening now. Yekaterina's silent courage had ignited a flame of hope in every heart. Human connection, altruism, and overcoming had triumphed over despair. The group, though wounded and exhausted, was united, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. The path ahead was still uncertain, but the light of resilience guided their steps. The village had found not only a path to safety, but a new understanding of its own inner strength, reflected in Yekaterina's wise and silent eyes. The cold still bit, but the warmth of hope had settled in their hearts. A warmth that not even the YAKUT winter could extinguish. The warmth of hope needed to be nurtured. The exit from the canyons revealed a less hostile landscape, but still covered in thick snow. Yekaterina, with renewed energy from overcoming the last obstacle, continued to guide the group. Her gestures now more fluid, indicating a route that deviated from the most dangerous rock formations. She felt the earth beneath the snow, the elevations and depressions, as if the very ground whispered the secrets of the path. Boris, his voice hoarse, but his spirit lifted, relayed the elder's instructions. "North! There's a natural shelter just ahead. Yekaterina feels we're close." The exhausted villagers found strength in unity. The reindeer, with their heavy hooves, broke a path through the deep snow, their warm bodies offering temporary relief from the biting cold. Lena, with the reindeer calves in her arms, felt her heart fill with gratitude. They were alive. They were together. Nikolai, at the rear, watched their tracks, the fissure in the ice and the now distant canyons, chilling memories. The blizzard subsided, and a pale grey light peeked through, promising an end to the darkness. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours, Yekaterina stopped. She pointed to an imposing rock formation, with a dark opening at its base, a natural refuge against the fury of winter. A muffled cry of relief echoed among the villagers. They had arrived. The elder turned to the group, her eyes shining with silent satisfaction. She made a broad gesture, indicating safety and rest, and then, with her hands joined over her chest, conveyed family and home. Boris ran to her, hugging her tightly, tears streaming freely down his face. "Yekaterina, you brought us back. You saved us." His voice was a whisper of pure emotion. The villagers hurried to the shelter, helping one another. The reindeer were led inside, their bodies warming the small space. Fires were lit with the dry wood they had brought, and the warmth began to dissipate the penetrating cold. The children, previously paralyzed by fear, now laughed and hugged each other, innocence returning to their faces. Lena, with the reindeer calves safe, sat near the fire, watching the elder. Yekaterina sat in silence, observing everyone, a small smile on her lips. She did not hear the noise, but she felt the vibration of life, gratitude, and love that filled the shelter. The threat of the polar bears had been definitively overcome. Lured onto the unstable ice, with its collapse, they were forced to retreat, unable to cross the vast fissure of water and ice. Yekaterina's wisdom, her ability to feel the world in a way no one else could, had been the key to survival. That night, under the protection of the rocks and the warmth of the fire, the village gathered. Stories would be told, legends would be born. Yekaterina, the silent guardian, had become more than a wise elder. She was the embodiment of YAKUT resilience, living proof that true strength lies in connection to the earth, in faith in one another, and in the courage to face the impossible. Her deafness, once seen as a vulnerability, proved to be her greatest strength. allowing her to perceive the hidden truths of the world. The winter was still long, but the village had found its beacon, its guide. The promise of a new dawn was not just hope, but certainty, forged in the heart of snow and ice, and sealed by the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. Yekaterina's village would live, and its story would be sung by the winds of Yakutia for generations. The following morning brought with it an icy clarity, but also a peace they hadn't felt in days. The wind still howled, but the natural shelter offered a welcome respite. Fires crackled, warming bodies and hearts. Yekaterina, awake before the pale sun peeked through, watched the sleeping village. She felt the vibration of each one's calm breathing, the slow and steady rhythm of life that had been so fiercely defended. A small smile touched her lips, a silent acknowledgement of the victory won. Boris was the first to approach her, his eyes swollen from sleep, but full of a newfound reverence. He knelt, taking the elder's wrinkled hands. "Yekaterina," he whispered, his voice choked, "we have no words for your wisdom. You are the rock that saved us." Yekaterina squeezed his hands in response, her eyes conveying a message of humility and love. She made a slow gesture, pointing to the sleeping group, then to herself, and finally to her heart, indicating all of us, together. The strength was not hers alone, but theirs all. Lena, with the reindeer calves nestled near the fire, awoke with a sigh. She stood up and walked to Yekaterina, her eyes tearful. "The little ones are safe, Elder. Thanks to you, life will continue." She touched Yekaterina's wrinkled face with tenderness, and the elder inclined her head, accepting the gesture of gratitude. The reindeer, now calm, chewed the fodder the villagers had managed to bring, a soft sound that Yekaterina felt as a murmur of contentment. The herd, the heart of the village, was intact. Nikolai, with a more serene expression than ever, joined them. He had spent the night watching, ensuring everyone's safety. "My faith wavered, Yekaterina," he confessed, his voice low. "But you showed me true strength, the strength that comes from within and from the earth." Yekaterina nodded, her eyes fixed on his, understanding every unspoken word. She made a gesture to the sky, then to the earth, and finally to Nikolai's own chest, signifying, "Wisdom is in everything, and in you too." In the days that followed, the village remained in the shelter, recovering. The Yakut winter, though relentless, seemed less daunting now. The blizzard gave way to a clearer sky, and the sun, though weak, brought a glimpse of hope. The villagers began to plan for the future. Returning to the old village was not an option, as the bears could still be a threat and the lake ice had become permanently unstable. Yekaterina, with her precise gestures, indicated a new area further east, where the mountains offered protection and the valleys pastures for the reindeer. A route she felt to be safe, away from the predators' paths. The construction of the new village was arduous work, but undertaken with a renewed spirit. Every log, every stone, was placed with purpose, a silent tribute to the resilience Yekaterina had awakened in them. The children helped, carrying small branches, their laughter echoing in the icy air, a sound of life and hope. The women wove new furs, the men hunted and built, and the community flourished, more united than ever. Yekaterina, though not participating in heavy physical labor, was the pulsating heart of the new village. She sat near the central fire, her wise eyes observing every interaction, her gentle gestures offering advice and comfort. Her deafness was no longer a barrier, but a portal to a deeper understanding of the world. She felt joy, sorrow, hope, the vibrations of life in their purest form. Her legend grew each day, told by parents to children, by elders to the young. The story of the woman who, with her silent courage and ancestral wisdom, guided her people through the icy fury, proving that true strength lies in the ability to feel, in human connection, and in the unbreakable resilience of the spirit. The new village, built with sweat and faith, became a sanctuary of life and hope. The winter was still long, but they were prepared. Yekaterina, the silent guardian, watched the horizon, feeling the pulse of the earth and the warmth of united hearts. Yekaterina's village would not only live, it would prosper, an eternal testament to the unwavering strength of the human spirit, a beacon of resilience in the relentless vastness of Yakutia. The promise of a new dawn had become a vibrant reality, a legacy that would be sung by the winds for all future generations.